Shalom everyone, it's Friday again, and this time it's Parashat Ekev. In our parasha, we continue Moshe Rabbeinu's speech to the Jewish people, inspiring them and getting them ready for going into the land of Israel. And beautifully, we find in our parasha a very famous piece. We're collecting a lot of the famous pieces of Jewish liturgy come from Sefer Dvarim, especially the beginning of Sefer Dvarim. And here we have the second paragraph of Shema. V'haya im Shamoah. Now, ironically, Shema is the most famous to the first piece, which we saw in the previous parasha. But, and the first piece of Shema is actually the piece that we say most. We say Shema, I would say, there are some people that say Shema 5 times a day. Now, you go figure out why 5 times a day and not 3 times a day. That, if you figure it out, write to me in the comments. That's if you go to shul. But for those that say Shema 5 times a day, they still only say V'haya im Shamoah 3 times a day. There you go. There you have the continuation of your riddle. Write to me in the comments if you have ideas. I can't promise any prizes, but I will give you a thumbs up. V'haya im Shamoah is a very famous piece that we say all the time, every day, as just argued. And here's an opportunity to actually take a look at what it says. If you listen to all of the commandments that God gives us, to love God with all of your heart and all of your soul. This is very clearly a kind of expanded version of the first paragraph of Shema. We'll see the end of V'haya im Shamoah continues, right? The end of the first paragraph of Shema. But by the way, why sometimes it's kind of confusing, the first and second parashat, because the second parashat, in essence, is a kind of expanded version, and we'll see the main difference in the middle. Then, if you do all of this, V'haya im Shamoah tishmon, if you listen, v'natati metar atzechem be'ito, I will give you rain on time, which is a big deal, by the way. We all know when weather can be very unfortunate and unhelpful. God promises weather at the best of times when it's necessary. And you will gather in all of your fruits and all of your agriculture. And everyone will have plenty of food. If the animals will have enough food, and you will eat, and you will, be full. But be careful. You have been forewarned. If you follow your heart off the beaten track, and you go astray, and you fall into the trap of paganism, and you actively go through with this, then God will become angry with you. In that case, instead of v'natati matar atzechem beito, v'lo yeh matar, there will be no rain. V'adama lo titen et yevula, and there will be no grain, there will be no agriculture, there will be no economy. Ve'avadatem hera me'al haaretz hatova asher Adonai noten lachem, and you will, in essence, in the end, be kicked out of the land. You will be exiled. This whole enterprise of leaving Egypt, going through the desert, coming to the land of Israel, is all al t'nai, is all on condition that you stick to the code, that you stick to the rules. But if you don't, you will, in essence, be kicked out. Take good care of this, take good note of this. And again, going back to the first paragraph of Shema, and you write this in the tefillin, and the mezuzot, and your kids, and all of these different things, right? This is something that we need to take to heart. Now, I remember hearing from one of my teachers that the first paragraph of Shema is much more focused, or in many ways directed towards every individual Jew. One of the reasons why nearly every individual Jew who has any sort of religious education, even the most, basic, Sunday school, whatever it is, gone to shul once or twice a year, they will all know Shema. Shema is the most famous piece of Jewish liturgy for a good reason, because that is, in many ways, the most important creed, and we've talked about this, in which every Jew recognizes their relationship with God, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and so on and so forth. The second paragraph of Shema, as one of my teachers, I can't remember exactly who, I think it might have been Rav Yoel Ben-Nun, but I don't remember for sure, says that this is much more focused on the nation. The first paragraph of Shema is for the individual. The second part of the Shema is for the klal, right? Le'ahava et Hashem Elokechem. This is talking to the nation. You should love God, and this is where we talk about an economy, we talk about geopolitics. Will you stay in the land of Israel? Will you leave the land of Israel? Will you succeed? Will you not succeed as a nation, as a group? And so the first paragraph is the prat, the second paragraph is the klal, and these in many ways kind of connect to each other. As we well know, Judaism is a mingling of the individualistic element and the communal element, and is part of what builds our community and our individual relationship with God. But coming back to this question, the V'haya im Shamoah, I actually want to challenge this phrase, this idea, and ask, does this actually work? V'haya im Shamoah, if you listen to God, you will have a roaring economy. And if you are not religious, you go off the beaten track, you will have an economy in the dumps. Is that true? And I'd like to answer in a typical rabbinic fashion, saying yes, but also no. Yes, in a way, and here's my argument, in the macro, yes. In the micro, also yes. In the middle, I don't know what the official term for the not macro, not micro is, the middleism, it's complex. And let me explain. The Tanakh itself, even though it uses this very much as a template, going through, Sefer Shoftim, Sefer Shmuel, Sefer Malachim, throughout all of the Nevi'im, talking about constantly, you guys are going off the rails, and you guys aren't fulfilling the commandments, and you guys are going to fail. This is the cost. Every king is measured. Is he a good king? Is he a bad king? Is he keeping the halacha? Is he keeping the rules? Is he not keeping the rules? Is he being moral? Is he not being moral? Ben adam lechavro, ben adam lemakom. All of these different questions which constantly are discussed throughout the Tanakh. Yes, very clearly this is the model. But there is a more nuanced element emphasized in the Torah itself, and obviously throughout the Nevi'im, that talks about this. Yes, to a certain degree, this is the Shurat Adin, this is the official guidelines. If X, then Y. If you cross the line, you're out. But the way God runs the world is Bedin Shel Rachamim. God gives people extra chances. God gives people, as we see from Sefer Amos, right? Al shlosha chatei Yehuda val arba'a lo ashivena, right? It's 3 strikes, 4 strikes, you're out, right? We see Kilo Shalem Avon Haimori, the nations are judged, and sometimes they have to reach a certain level of evil to truly actually face the consequences. So we see in the middle, when we actually look outside the windows, when we're reading the news, when we're looking at life, I would say in the present, it's very hard to see this very clear, kind of if X then Y. If it's not as if it's very clear, like you're playing a computer game, and if you press the right button, it rains, and if you don't press the right button, you don't get rain. That's not how we see the world. We see the world through the much more complex, I'd say, mirage of Midat Hadin and Midat Rachamim mixing in the middle. And that's very often how history is, why historians are trying to figure out exactly what are the causes, how did this work, how does it all figure out. But on a micro level, it very much does work. On a micro level, we find that individually, and by the way, one of the people who talked about this very beautifully and is very famous for talking about this is the psychologist and philosopher Jordan Peterson, who talks very much about the individual. If the individual makes bad choices, if an individual abuses substances or so on and so forth, then they will face the consequences of that. That is not necessarily a punishment per se, but they will face the music. It will ruin their relationships. It will ruin their health. It will ruin their life, and so on and so forth. And that, to a certain degree, is not a kind of spiritual system. That is just the way the world works. If you follow the rules of justice and fairness, then you will have a good life. Obviously there are exceptions, and as I mentioned, there are complexities, but to a large part, if you go to sleep properly, if you eat properly, if you're healthy, then these are the ways to lead a positive experience in this world. That is the micro. On the macro, and by the way, this is also true with regard to spirituality. They've done surveys. Very often, people who have most satisfaction in life, people who feel most connected in life to their community, to their surroundings, and their happiness levels and so on, so forth, often religious people. Because again, if you have purpose, if you have focus, if you have a concept of God and a concept of justice and a concept of future and a concept of past, these are all structures that give you a healthy lifestyle, both religiously and physically. Again, there are exceptions. It's also true on the macro level. If we look at the broad arch of history, a society, a nation that follows the path of law, of justice, of fairness, of focus on investing in society, investing in individuals, of having a common cause, of having a common past, of sharing a common future, of hope, of investment in individuals, in societies, in communities, that is a healthy society. If a society follows the halakha, follows the Torah, follows the path of life, right? Derech etz chaim, the path, right? Etz chaim hila machazikim ba v'tomchei ma'ushar. If you follow the Torah, it is a tree of life. It is a path of the future. If a society, and by the way, this is very true of a Western society that we live in today. The founding fathers of America, the great jurists of England who developed all of the structures that we know of, that are society, of government, of human rights, and so on and so forth. These are all ideas that are taken very clearly, explicitly from the Tanakh. This is the Torah is, in many ways, thou shalt not kill, is the way to live and to have a functional, civilized society. If you follow that path and you actually hold to it, and you don't get distracted, you don't start, focusing on other fake and false ideologies and focuses and ideas like that, then you will have a successful society. Then the trains will work on time, the economy will again, nature itself works within a system. If you work within that system, you will succeed. So on the macro, it is true. On the micro, it is true. And now we live in the complex world in which I would even say it is the supernatural world. In nature, if you stick your finger in the fire, you get burnt. But in the spiritual world, the complex world that we live in today, sometimes you can get away with crimes. You can get away with murder. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad people get away with things? Because we live in this kind of matrix of complex ideas of God himself giving people extra chances, consequences. It's not as clear cut as a lightning bolt will strike you if you do the wrong thing. That's not how we live in our kind of mid-tier of existence. And as such, sometimes when we read Shema, we can sometimes feel, wait, this isn't true. This doesn't work. How am I supposed to, it's not as clear cut. It's not like a vending machine. Like if I press the button, I'm keeping the mitzvahs, then I should, get a good economy. No, there's definitely a lot going on. But if we remind ourselves that in general, this is the general way that God created the world, both on the microcosm of individual choice, of b'chira chavshit, of Bacharta b'chaim, choose life, choose the path of justice. And also the macro level of this is how the economy works, this is how society works, this is how history works, this is how humanity works. Then sometimes it can anchor us and recognize that, yes, we can see through the fog of the complexity of life, which God purposefully put in there for the reasons that we will discuss furthermore coming in Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shuvah, and Kapara, and all of the different elements of humanity being given more leeway than we might actually think. Midat HaRachamim. But if we are reminded of this every day, 3 times a day, I remind you of the riddle at the beginning, 3 times a day, this is an opportunity for us to try and align ourselves with the way that God created the world and the way that the world would like to be lived. So this is our challenge. Bezrat Hashem, next time you read the second paragraph of Shema, give it a thought. Shabbat Shalom.